Today we're going to take a look at KO1 for Year 7 Pathway X. In this example, I'm going to take a look at rounding to 1 decimal place. So before we do that, we've got to know, what does that mean? Well, here I have my decimal point. The first number after my decimal is the 8. So that's as far as I want to go. But in order to do that, I have to take a look at the next number after that. And I have the number 2. Now, what does the 2 tell me to do to the 8? Because the 2 is less than 5, I leave the 8 exactly as it is. So if I round to 1 decimal place, I have 753.8. Now, because I've rounded, I've got to say what I rounded to. So that's to 1 decimal place. Let's take a look at the second example. Again, I'm going to round to 1 decimal place. The 4 is my first decimal number. The 8 is my deciding number. That tells me what to do to the 4. Because the 8 is 5 or bigger than 5, that tells me to round the 4 up to a 5. So that becomes 65.5. Again, I've got to say what I've rounded it to 1 decimal place. This third example is a little more tricky. Again, we're going to round to 1 decimal place. So if I take a look at that, the 9 is at my first decimal point. The 8 is my deciding number. Again, what does the 8 tell me to do to 9? Because the 8 is 5 or greater than 5, that tells me to round the 9 up. Well, 9 plus 1 becomes 10. That 9 becomes a 0. The 1 then gets carried over to the 5, and that becomes 46.0. Now, because the question has asked you to write it to 1 decimal place, you must put the 0 in. And don't forget to tell me what you've rounded up to 1 decimal place. Take a look at these 3 examples, press pause, and we'll go through it in a second. I've got to round to 1 decimal place. In question 1, 5 is my first decimal place. The 7 is my deciding number. The 7 is greater than 5, so that tells me to round the 5 up to a 6. So that becomes 2.6. And I have to put what I've rounded it to 1 decimal place. For the second one, my first decimal place is 0. The 1 is my deciding number. The 1 tells me to leave the 0 as it is because it's less than 5, so that becomes 53.0 to 1 decimal place. I have to put the 0 because the question's asked me to round it to 1 decimal place. For the third one, the 9 is in the position of my first decimal place. The 5 is my deciding number. The 5 tells me to round the 9 up, so the 9 becomes a 0. I carry the 1 over, so the 4 becomes a 5. So that is 35.0 to 1 decimal place.